thing is, actually, I found out about Foxhaven while I was living in France. I was got trapped in Paris because there was a strike, as there is in Paris, and so I ended up being like hooked up with a friend of a friend and stayed with her over the night. And she was also from Frederick, and she was like, "Oh, have you ever heard of Foxhaven? Like, you should check this place out when you get back. I think you'd like it." And so I kept it in the back of my head. And then when I moved back from France, I worked in DC for a couple of years, and I started working at a farm down there called Arcadia, and it was connected with the restaurant group that I was already working for. And I really loved it, and I like totally wanted to change my life and like go into farming after that. And I knew that I would need to spend several years like figuring out how to do that and getting enough skills that anybody would want me to farm for them. And so I did that. I volunteered for years on farms, and then like started working on some paid farms. And then when I moved back to Frederick, because I'm from Frederick, I looked up Foxhaven and was like, well, I should see if they're hiring. I didn't see anything online, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, no big deal. I'll like keep working in fine dining and the kind of stuff I was already doing. And then my mentor from the Arcadia sent me the job listing here. I think the way that Foxhaven has often done job like offerings have been like kind of a little bit more back channel, not like in a secretive way, but just kind of like, you know, to other farmers or to other people that we like kind of already know are in the field. And so there had been like a job listing put out that my farm manager found and sent it to me. And so I applied, and it was for 15 hours a week to work in the vegetable garden here. And I came and, you know, did well enough on the interview that they hired me and started working here during the day, and I was working at a restaurant in the evening. And pretty quickly, I think I got hired in February, and by May I was already full-time here because I had all these ideas and I like wanted to start these programs. And also 15 hours is not very much to work on a garden. It's a decent sized garden. So yeah, within that first couple months I went full-time, and then I worked on vegetables all the rest of that year. And after the end of that year I was like, I really don't want to do vegetables. Like, I'd really love to do herbs, because at that point I had already been working a little bit with Holly Pulkavana in DC, and I'd already been working with Molly Meehan and taking some of the classes at Wild Ginger. So I already kind of had like a path that I was going down with herbs. And it turns out that one of our past board members, previous to me being here, was one of the founders of Thai Sophia, which became the Maryland University of Integrative Health. And so we already had someone on board that had already been talking about herbs a lot and liked herbs a lot, and so the staff here wasn't unaware of herbs, you know, like they already kind of had like a background in that. And Joanne, my director here, was like, yeah, try it, go for it. So I went on this little field trip, road trip for, you know, like a week in the summer, and I tried to visit a couple of different herbal CSAs, because at the time I couldn't really find much. There wasn't one around here. And so I went up to Boston area, and I stopped in Philadelphia, and there was somebody in New York that I chatted with. So I got to see a couple of examples and decided, like, I think I could do that. I think that's possible. Sawmill herbs was really helpful, and getting to meet Owen Taylor, who now runs True Love Seeds. At the time he was working for William Royce Weaver, doing seed saving with him. So it like wasn't specifically herb related, but like I was interested in seed saving also, and like maybe we might want to do like herbs and seeds. I'm still interested in seeds, but I realized that like each of those things is a lot to focus on. And so yeah, getting to meet both of those folks was really great. Everybody that I met on the tour was super helpful. It was a good opening for me also to recognize, and like now that I've been like working on things like the Chesapeake Herb Shed, it was a really good way for me to recognize that like actually farmers are really good at sharing information with each other, and it's a really great way of learning. But you have to have you have to set up those meetings, and you have to set up those, you know, parameters. But because we're usually so busy and we're not great at getting back to each other by like email and phone and that kind of stuff, so like you have to build the spaces to do it. But actually like farmers are really generous with each other, which is cool, because not all professions are like that.
For sure.
Yeah. So I came to herbs and herbalism through my own health journey. and I've had kind of chronic condition since I was a teenager. It's one of those conditions that you get and your doctor's kind of like, we don't really know what causes this, we don't know how to treat it, and there's no cure for it. But it's, the kind of illness that you can live with, and most people won't know that you're dealing with anything. But there were definitely times where I was going through like quite a lot of struggle and quite a lot of pain, and I really felt like my doctors were being super helpful. And I also didn't feel like it was a partnership when I would go and talk to my doctors. I kind of felt like I'd just get kind of pathologized, and like it wasn't a conversation at all. And through farming vegetables, I kind of learned about wild ginger and the like herbal farming world, and started taking classes with them, and just got really enamored with that way of looking at illnesses, that way of looking at herbs, that way of looking at food. And so it was a really great opportunity for me to start feeling like I had some agency in my own health. And it also gave me a place to like start listening to my body more. So it's not like I didn't have all these like symptoms or like signals, but I didn't really know how to interpret them before that. And so it was an experience of like that first tea tasting that I ever did with Molly, where I think it was a rosemary tea, and she had us, sip the tea and say like, where does this go in your body? And it was a totally foreign concept to me, very much just like it goes in my throat and my stomach. But as I practiced that, and it actually wasn't that different from what I was already doing in fine dining with wine pairings and stuff. Like I already knew how to taste wine, and so it was very similar in that sense, but like listening to different cues than the wine. So that was a really cool like introduction, I felt like, to herbs, and from there I've just like really enjoyed having herbs as an ally and a partnership in my life. Not that like herbs ever, it's like I had like a miraculous healing or anything, like I still have the condition that I had when I was a teenager, but herbs make life feel like more manageable when it comes to dealing with whatever illness you have.
Yeah, like you're more adaptable.
Yeah, and I like have things at my disposal that I can use that aren't things like steroids, that like have these really detrimental effects over time. So especially having something that's potentially lifelong, like you don't want to be using like things that have all these terrible side effects or like are going to shorten other parts of your experience in life. So being able to rely on herbs for things has really helped that. But yeah, we basically have 3 different gardens, and this garden that we'll see first I usually refer to as our butterfly garden, because it kind of like looks like a butterfly. So we'll walk up the body of the butterfly, and then there's a wing on either side.
Cool.
So these were previously hay fields. They were hayed for quite a while, but when I started kind of taking over, I didn't really want to do hay as much anymore. I wanted it to be a bit more like a prairie grassland, which a hayfield does do that. But it was, I don't know, it was just creating a lot of like machinery here and that kind of stuff, that it was nice to like not have as much of that. So what we recognized when we kind of stopped mowing so much was that we get quite a lot of milkweed. And so we wanted to kind of like let the milkweed be present more for the butterflies. But yeah, no, I've kind of just like enjoyed it being like a little bit wild.
Mm-hmm.
I like it to be like a little untamed. Yeah, Foxhaven's been really pretty open to experimentation and to letting me, kind of try things out and see if it works. And yeah, it's been pretty open, and honestly, it's felt a lot like entrepreneurship without a lot of the the stress or the risks of entrepreneurship, because like there's I have a salary and there's like other things that support us here too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been nice, and pretty much everything that we do here, we try to have like a focus on education, like in a place where we can do education. So yeah, like with these flower beds that we put in here that are just getting established, like this is their first year, so they're still pretty weedy, but we used a permaculture technique of like following the contour. just to kind of see like how that worked for us and how we like that. But then, like these two beds that are next to us that are bee balm, I just put in because like I really like bee balm, and I thought it would be really pretty to walk through like, a little field of bee balm. And they seem to like, they do well in a prairie setting. And so I'm always trying to think about like where do the herbs like to be, where do they want to be? Because the more you try to kind of push them into places that they don't want to be, the less well they're going to perform for you anyways. But also the more maintenance usually it is if you're putting them in a place where they're not happy. And we'll see this in the garden actually. There's two places that I put gotu kola this year. One's in the sun and one's in the shade. And the ones in the shade are so much happier. And, so you do little experiments like that and kind of see like what works well here, what seems happy here. And then you learn from the plants where they want to be. And they either do really well or they die. And that is good information for the next year. So much of farming is trial and error and learning from each other, like going and visiting other farms, talking to other farmers, reading books from other farmers. You learn a lot from other people's trial and error. Yeah, and farming's always evolving too. Like what works for you for a couple of years might stop working after a while. Like the conditions might change. I was just reading, just got to do a great like heritage trip for myself in Scotland, and I was reading a history book on the way there, and they kept using the phrase climate change in this history book, like talking about like way long ago and like how the climate was changing. And it was a really, I don't know why it struck me so much, but I was like, well, this is nice actually to remember that like we're not the first ones to experience a shift in climate. We're not the first ones to live through climate change. We're not the first ones to like be used to doing things a certain way and then having to shift and do something a different way because it no longer works. And I feel like so much of farming is having to be adaptable, and like some years things do great, and some years things don't do so great, but there's always something that does really well, depending on like what the conditions are that year. And so you always just kind of have to be willing to go with it, I feel like. And also like let go of when things don't work out. It's not always your fault. There's not always anything you could have done.
Right.
The weather's going to do what the weather's going to do, or the bugs or the deer or whatever. However many times we've tried to get that deer out of there, they're not leaving. So that's one of the conditions that I have to like work around now.
Right.
So this garden here is the butterfly garden, which is herbs that can withstand deer pressure for the most part. So we've got like 2 rows of wormwood here, and these wormwoods are well past their harvest time. You would harvest them when they're flowering. We didn't do a big harvest this year because we just didn't have a big buyer this year, but they're ready to be cut back. You can see where they're like nice and green and lush down here, but the flowering part has died back. So we'll give these a good haircut this winter and get them ready for next year. We might do a bigger harvest next year. We also put mullein up here, and echinacea was up here. Our milky oats were living up here as well. The mullein is finished now, but I am going to save seeds from them. So like that is one of the things that I got from Owen, right, is like recognizing that seed saving can be really helpful. And if your plants are doing really well in a place and you have a large enough population of them, like it's a great idea to save the seeds, because now you have like a good genetic bank for the future. So yeah, we're saving the seeds from those. Echinacea's doing all right. It needs a couple of years to kind of like get established before we can dig up the roots, pull out the weeds that are growing in there. That's a constant. But we'll leave the mullein, and we'll leave the echinacea that's from this year, and then we'll take out the mulleins that are done, because they're a 2-year plant, whereas echinacea is like 3 to 4 years before we harvest the roots. But we did get a good harvest of leaf and flower.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then our fennels are up here. This fennel is a seed fennel, a perennial fennel, and this is our harvest time right now for the fennel. So we're harvesting all these like nice plump fennels. We harvest them when they're nice and green like this, and put them on our drying rack, and then garble them when they're done drying. Fennel is definitely one of those ones that like I love fennel, but a lot of people don't love fennel, and I also think it's because maybe they just associate it with licorice, and they don't love licorice. But I think fennel is so sweet, and I love to put it in our CSA because I usually turn a couple people where they're like, oh no, I don't like fennel, but then they'll try it and they'll be like, oh, actually it makes a really lovely tea. And it's such a gentle herb, and it's one that I really rely on a lot for digestive issues. And I feel like it's slightly moistening, which is nice for my dry constitution. So it's just like one of my favorite ones to grow, and I love that it grows pretty much regardless of what happens during the season. You know,
Pretty resilient plant.
Yeah, they're not very picky. It doesn't seem like they grow every year, and every year we get a good harvest. So that's been like a good one to rely on for sure.
Yeah, it seems like
Yeah,
they're doing great.
they're happy. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're happy. Carice just did a nice weed whack today of this bed. So these are Vitex berries, which are really young. This is their first year flowering, which is very exciting. I planted these, I don't know, 4 years ago by seed.
Oh my goodness.
And this is their first year giving us like cute little berries.
Oh, that's so amazing.
Yeah, eventually they'll be giant, but they start out so young and so tiny from seed. So it's really cool to see them come into fruition. And then, we've got some St. John's worts kind of planted around them. Those are the plants that we feel like can live outside of the fence without a whole lot of issues from anything that might want to nibble on them. Yep, yeah, so we put some olive oil in here and then started dropping in the St. John's wort buds as they were ready. We stopped getting flowers. I think they're done for the season, but we still have this nice oil that's been infusing in the sun, and it'll make a really nice oil for anybody that wants to use it on their skin, on sunburns, that kind of thing, but also for folks that might have
depression, right? I've heard that. But
yeah, some folks use St. John's wort for depression. I think of it a lot myself for nerve pain. So for things like shingles, really helpful for that. Yeah, and that, there was a PubMed study that looked at the way that this medicine is produced in the Balkans has always been done out in the sun like this. It was either sunflower oil or olive oil. They studied both, but they found that there's something in the St. John's wort, the hypericin, some part of that protects the oil from getting damaged, from getting rancid from the sun, and so it can live outside. Whereas most oils, we would make inside. This one is kind of nice to make outside because it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So this orchard, we started this orchard with the American Chestnut Foundation, and so it was like the fencing was put in for them. And so all of the larger trees in here are American chestnuts. And the idea with the American Chestnut Foundation, looking for a place to grow, is that they have a bunch of different orchards in our region, and they take American chestnuts that are still alive, and they cross them with a Chinese chestnut, and then they back cross them with the American 3 times. So you get an F3. And they were trying to find a spot to grow out some of those F3s. So we gave them a spot for that, and I think they plant like 200 of them, and then they infect all of them with the blight intentionally. They'll get the blight regardless, it's in the atmosphere here, the environment, but they do already give them the blight just to be sure. And then they come through and cull out any of the ones that they think aren't doing well. So out of the several hundred that they put in, we have 12-ish that they say these are the good ones, these ones are producing well, and they let them cross and breed, and then they come back and take those seeds every so often. Yeah. Awesome. So as they started to do all that culling, right, we were left with more and more of this open space in an orchard, and fencing is expensive. So it was, we've very much thought of this as this is a beneficial thing that we have, is space that is fenced. And they weren't going to plant any more chestnuts. They were just going to kind of keep the chestnuts that they needed. And so we decided to start planting our own stuff. So we started putting in some apples, mostly cider apples, some cherries, some aronias. Those all went in. And then after a while, I started thinking we should put some herbs in too. Why not? There's still space in here. And I had seen some really interesting studies and some documentaries that had shown things like silviculture and intercropping. And they showed that if you intercrop, you can oftentimes get more product off of the same piece of land than if you monocrop. And so the way that they often do this, or the way that you often see this, is like they'll do strips of trees, and then they'll do strips of a grain, usually like wheat. And so they'll do these large blocks of wheat and then like intercrop them with trees. And the trees will have some sort of crop, or they're a lumber tree. And they just found that you could get a lot more off of the land that way. And so we thought, like, well, we might as well try that too. And it's been a great companion, I think. Over time, the trees do get large enough that they start to like shade out your crops, and the canopy starts closing. But that's expected. Some of the things will continue to kind of like subsist in here on their own. And some of the things
little forest
won't.
garden.
Yeah, like mint can kind of do its own thing.
Yeah.
Did you see that groundhog?
No.
Yeah. He was just sitting right over there. So yeah, some of these things we'll be able to like continue living even with a thick canopy. So this was the first bed that we put in, like as our intercropping bed, this one. And our orchardist at the time, Taylor Roman, he like took a pretty radical approach, because when I first started here, this orchard was just like a handful of chestnuts and grass. There was nothing else in here. It was like kept very manicured, and he just stopped mowing a lot of places. He just decided like, we're just gonna stop mowing and see what happens. And what happened is that we got all this beautiful goldenrod, this like beautiful yellow goldenrod that's now blooming, is kind of like one of the main crops that comes up when you stop mowing here. So that was great. And then we started kind of putting in more, things that we wanted to see, like more bee balm or more asters. And we brought in a lot of wormwoods, and just started kind of like augmenting what was already going to come up naturally, and then putting in our row crops as well. So yeah, these beds have worked really well for us, and we've like expanded to a couple of different beds, just basically like watching the gardens and feeling like, okay, this spot doesn't get too much shade, or like it gets like just enough shade for some crops that we might want. So we have like lemongrass over here, and also some lemongrass over here, and I just kind of kept coming out and looking and seeing like where does it stay really sunny, because they like sun. And then we put in those beds. So it's been, it's always a lot of observation and like conversation with the land, kind of seeing like where things might work, and then giving it a try.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
We don't use any irrigation, so we are technically dry farming on this land, which means that we really just rely on rain. We do have like rain barrels over here, so we can, get a small amount of water in cans, that kind of thing. But mostly I try to get all the herbs in the ground before the real like dry season hits, which is like late June, early July. And then, we do hand watering when we're putting things in. So I try to make sure things are really well watered before they go in, and then really well watered as they're going in. And then after that, they're kind of on their own. And so that is one of the reasons that I like growing herbs, and one of the reasons I wanted to grow herbs, is that vegetable crops have really been bred to need lots of irrigation, and need lots of hand holding, and need lots of weeding. A lot of herb crops are actually pretty resilient, and while they might not love it, they might not perform to their best when they're going through drought, a lot of them can handle it, and they'll actually produce more secondary plant metabolites, and they'll produce more of the, the anthocyanins or the flavonoids that we're trying to kind of pull from them in teas or tinctures or whatever. So.
And is that because they are less hybridized, less altered?
Partially, yeah. Partially because they're less hybridized and altered, and partially because those are the chemicals that they use in their body to protect themselves. Like just how we have an immune system, like the plants have an immune system, and part of those immune system responses are part of those protections that they've created over time. Like a plant like peppermint that has so many essential oils, like that high menthol, like that is a chemical that the plant produces to prevent things like deer from eating it. And so that's a benefit for the plant, but then it's also a benefit in our body. Or blackberries, for example, are like their cells full of those antioxidants and those sugars to protect themselves from sunburn. So like all the things that we have to think about for ourselves, like the plants also have to think about, and then we get to use those. So if you over baby your plants, especially herb plants, they're not going to produce those compounds as much because they won't have to,
Right.
if they're being like overly watered or overly fertilized. Again, there's a line, like you want to give them enough.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's times where I don't give them enough because we don't have irrigation here, right? Or like I don't have a lot of access to funding and compost. So there's definitely times where the herbs could do way better if I gave them just a little bit more. Or like we harvest a lot of violet and plantain out of these beds. And if I'm too strict on weed whacking and kind of keeping it really manicured, then we won't have those plants. And actually, like I just put these stakes up the other day because one of our employees does the mowing in here, and I don't want him to mow this area for a while because I want to be able to harvest plantain soon. So I put up some stakes to kind of be like, hey, like, don't mow so that like these little plantain babies like will grow a lot bigger and I'll be able to harvest them. So,
cool.
there's some like
volunteers.
wild management of volunteers also. We've got tons of ground ivy in here and violet, and we try to harvest these as a crop. So you just have to kind of manage for their needs. The same with the goldenrod, like if you weed whack everything in here all the time, there won't be any goldenrod, but if you just leave some of it to do its own thing, then we get all this beautiful goldenrod that we can harvest. Yeah, so when we're deciding like where to put things, again, I'm kind of trying to think about like what their base habitat would be like where they would already be growing on their own or what other plants they would like to grow with. I'm also thinking about like their shape and size and how much they spread, that kind of thing. So this area we stopped mowing and we got all of this goldenrod, and so interspersed in the goldenrod I started planting more bee balm. And bee balm is like a similar height, right? Here's the goldenrod, and here's the bee balm. So it's a similar height. They bloom at different times, so we're kind of focusing on them at different times. And they're offering, forage for insects at different times, which is nice, kind of trying to spread that out. Our previous orchardist was also a beekeeper, so he was also kind of trying to think about like what's going to bloom for the longest, or like how can we create blooms that, flower not at the same time so we get a longer season. Planted these hawthorns here, honestly not with a ton of thought. It was very much kind of like, let's see how they do here. But like we again kind of like looked at like where there's some gaps, where there's some holes, like they're going to need some space to grow. And yeah, I thought they would look really nice in with these grasses, kind of like more tall grassy plants. But yeah, this was very much just like trial and error.
And the experiment's going okay?
It's going okay. Like what we have found is that hawthorn is in the rose family, and so are the apples, and all of the apples get cedar apple rust, and so do the hawthorns. And that wasn't something I really thought about when we put them in, right? I was like, okay, yeah, we might have some issues, but as they've been growing, we're seeing the cedar apple rust, be an issue for them, and creating like these little galls, or these little areas where the rust, the cedar apple rust fungus is parasitizing this plant. We haven't actually gotten flowers and fruit yet, so I'll be really interested to see like will they be very marked and pocked like this, the way that our apples are. Our apples are not very pretty. They're totally edible and they're totally usable, but will we have a sellable product of hawthorn? I'm not sure. That also kind of depends on like what the market
Maybe people's hearts will
says.
open to some ugly fruit.
Yes, and that is a thing that's happening. Like, there's more and more studies, I feel like, coming out about how like ugly fruit has like higher antioxidants in them or higher nutrition. And so like there might be a place in the future for that, but currently I feel like it's kind of difficult to sell things to people that like have imperfections and Mars without people kind of expecting that they're going to get a deep discount or that it's not good. Like make something with it. Exactly. So and that is what happens on the global market, right? With like things that are not pretty, like all of the not pretty cherries make maraschino cherries. I don't know if I do. I think it changes at different times of the year. Like certainly like this time of year I'm more drawn to the shady areas. Like there's an area where the gotu kola is and the ashwagandha is this year that I'm really like feeling drawn to, but that's because it's hot, So I like all the different areas because they do offer, like, I'm glad that we have so much diversity here. It's something that I'm thinking about as we're getting ready to expand onto a new piece of property. Like how I've been growing the last 8 years has been amongst these 3 places, and it's offered me a lot of diversity and different like little ecosystems to work in. Whereas I'm going to have one parcel there, and I'm going to have to, if I want that, I'm going to have to create different ecosystems and like try to like create a bit of shade or create a bit of canopy or create an area that's more wet in some way. Whereas right now I just kind of have it automatically because we're just in different places.
Right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. I've still got some apples here. You can see our apples is what I'm talking about with like the apples are, they're edible, but like they're, they've got all kinds of like funky shapes and, colors. And this one got chewed on by a bird already. Yeah. They're like, this is what apples look like if you don't spray them with pesticides and, fungicides and stuff. Like they're going to look a little funky. These are cider apples, so they'll get pressed into something else. But,
nice.
Most people aren't looking for that at the grocery store.
Yeah, no.
For ritual or for transitions. And I bet she'll have a really lovely equinox. Like what's important to Hillary is sometimes a little different from what's important to me, but we often have a lot of overlap. And we've done, I've taught at her Herbal gathering before in the past, and she's come here and done classes for us before. So over the years we've overlapped lots.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's nice to have herbal friends and, people, again, like you learn so much just going to somebody else's land or listening to somebody else talk about how they like to do something. That I feel like even though those experiences are for the interns, technically, like, I very much get quite a lot out of it.
Of course, yeah.
It's nice to have people to reach out to. Like, last year, our milky oats, like, they looked fine, but then, like, it got cold, and then it rained, and then it got to up to 90 the next day. It was, like, 50 that night and 90 during the day. And they all turned brown, but they were still milking. And so it was, like, nice to be able to reach out to a couple of other herbal growers in the region and kind of be like, did that happen to yours too, or was it just mine?
Did it happen to hers?
Yeah, I think it did. Yeah, I think a couple people like that I talked to were like, yeah, that happened to mine too, or like it had happened to them before, that they had like started to turn brown before they were done milking. Or, like if they have a crop failure and I don't, like sometimes we can like sell to each other to kind of like bolster the needs of, whatever programming we're doing. There's so much need for herbs locally, I feel like, and especially like good quality herbs, that I feel like there's lots of room for many farms to be involved in herbs. Even like vegetable farms could start growing like, a couple herbal crops. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the herbal CSA here was build education in the community in our region for herbs. Wild ginger was already doing that. There was plenty of places already doing that, but I wanted to give them wanted to give people an experience of like being able to work with herbs each month in a similar way to vegetables, so that if they start seeing herbs at the at their co-ops or seeing herbs at the farmers market, that they could actually like feel confident to buy them, because that does seem like a big hindrance for a lot of people when they would see herbs at the farmers market. It's like, well, I don't know what to do with this.
Right.
I wanted to kind of focus mostly on education and being able to like help people, start feeling comfortable and make that transition. And then, there's lots of room. The more people are educated, then there's more and more room for farmers to grow it, because there'll be people that actually want to buy it.
Absolutely.
We're going to go to the original garden.
Oh, this is the first?
Yeah, this is the garden that I started with. And then, I've started those gardens later. So when I started, what was here is half of this garden was here, and the tank was already here for collecting rainwater, and yeah, that was pretty much it. And it was vegetables, so it was squash and tomatoes and things like that. When I started, it was in February, so I had some time to buy seeds and start things, and I just put in more vegetables because that's what they wanted. And then after that first year of growing vegetables, I switched to herbs, and it was a slow transition to an extent, because there was already some perennial vegetables and fruits in here, like the blackberries, and the asparagus was already in here. So I started putting things in, little by little, and still did some vegetables that second year, and then really shifted after that to full herbs. And we started with 12 CSA members our first year, once a month pickups, and then over time expanded to 2 places and then 3 places, and now we have 70 members and three locations. And then we got our drying license a couple years ago, and we started doing the dry CSA for the winter, which is usually 30 members.
Awesome.
Yeah, but most of it comes out of here. We saw those 2 gardens, and a decent amount of stuff is grown there, but I'd say that we still grow the majority of it here. Certainly the most variety here. So this is the garden that people will come and see if they're doing a tea tasting or taking a tour. We usually bring them to this garden, so I try to keep this one very diverse, so that people have lots to see. And then we also have kids groups that come, so I try to have a lot of the smelly stuff down here, like the basils and the mints, and things that are...
Oh, that's so sweet that went into consideration.
Yeah. I want people to be able to have tactile experiences with it. We do have some things in here like nettle and rue that are you shouldn't touch, so I try not to put too much of those things in, or I try to keep them in kind of lower areas of the garden. Generally the way that I laid this garden out was, I think it was the second year that I was growing herbs here. We had 22 inches in a month of rain, and that was a lot. It flooded. Everything flooded down here, right? And that was such a huge amount of rain that year. And these bottom beds stayed flooded pretty much for the rest of the season. I couldn't use them for the rest of the season. And so from then on, I was like, all right, that could happen again, because our water table is not too low here. It's fairly high, and then we're also just right by this creek. So from there on, I wanted to plan it so that everything that was in the bottom part of the garden could handle being wet. We're plants that liked being wet, so if that ever happened again, we wouldn't lose plants necessarily. So I put things down here like the nettles and the valerian and the meadowsweet and the horsetail, and we put things like burdock down there because burdock can handle some water. I put things like the marshmallow lives down there, and this year got a little crazy and put ashwagandha down there, which you probably wouldn't love it if it got inundated, but we haven't had that happen in a while, so I'm starting to test the boundaries again, I think. But generally I'm putting things down there that can handle that. And then these willows actually came out of that flooding. I did not plant these willows, but the year that it flooded, what came up the next year was cattails and willow, which means, right, it's similar to how we stopped mowing in the orchard, which means that the seed bed here, the seed bank, already contained willow seeds and cattail. The cattail died off, within a year or so. They really do like it to stay wet, but the willow stayed, and it's been a really cool experience to have shade in the garden that I wasn't anticipating or didn't plan on, because I've only really been able to get certain plants to grow under that that like wouldn't be happy in the sun. So things like skullcap have been happy there, and the gotu-kola has been happy there. The wood betony's been pretty happy there. Yeah, it created a new environment for us, and that allowed us to have some herbs that we were struggling with.
I was trying to. Awesome.
Yeah, and you know, it's like it's a push and pull, because you can see that like this bed right now, half of it's in shade, and the ashwagandha doesn't really prefer to have shade. It's a plant that comes from India and like loves the full sun. So it's a give and take. Like there's plants that aren't going to do as well there. And we only have so many beds that we can do annuals in. That's the thing about herbs, actually, is that because so many of them are perennial, if you start, putting a lot of beds in perennials, all of a sudden now you only have a couple of beds that can do annuals. So you have to rotate those beds more frequently. Like ashwagandha, I rotate that to a new planting area every year, because I don't want the pests that like ashwagandha to be already present there the next year. So I have to kind of keep rotating them, but it gets harder and harder to rotate the more perennials I put in. There's a really cool program. I'm pretty technology adverse, but I'm trying to get better about it. I do keep a lot of spreadsheets and notes and things like that, but there's a program that I'm looking to start using. It's called Farm OS, and it's an open source program, but basically you can take like overhead views, like Google Maps views, and you can click on a bed basically and take your notes about that bed, and like it'll get logged, and then you'll have all of those like in a very physical way, but also in a very like organized way. And you can do it for things like compost, you can do it for beekeeping. They have all these different modules, and I looked at it years ago and I was just like, oh, it's too much, I can't wrap my head around it. And now I'm starting to come around to like, oh yeah, it would be really nice to have like that data in a more like succinct way, like all in one program, not on all my like 12 different spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But as far as like organizing the garden goes, I think it's just because I'm here all the time, like unless I'm on vacation, like I'm here pretty much every day of the week. Even on my days off, I tend to like bring the dog over and go for a walk, or like I'll, do a crop walk while I'm, on my day off. And so I'm just here all the time, so I can remember, like I'll remember that the ashwagandha was here and know that like I need to put it in one of these other beds next year. Yeah, and I know about like, the size of the beds now, like what can go in a bed, or like what it can handle. But even still, I'm still like, it's still trial and error to, even with those years of experience, like there's still things that you can like learn from other people and get better at. So there's still things where it's like, oh, I thought I knew how that worked, and actually I learned something new. I feel like trying to run everything on a tight budget is probably like one of the harder parts of like running the farm, is that I'm always kind of trying to use what we have and keep things cost effective. And there are tools that would make it a lot easier, or there is a need for a lot of compost that we should buy, and that kind of thing. So I feel like that's one of the harder parts of running the garden, is kind of like trying to do it cheaply, and sometimes it would benefit from more resources. I feel like over time, like the beds have like de-weeded themselves pretty well, actually. When I first started here, like it was a ton of thistle, like all these beds down here always had so much thistle in them, and so like that has changed over time, which is nice. Like it's a lot more like grasses, which aren't great, but like at least like you can pull those out like without hurting yourself. So like it's been interesting to watch things change over time. Some of the beds are feeling really established now, and like there's not as much, like it's not that we don't have to do any maintenance, but like they feel pretty solid, they feel pretty established. And then there's beds that like we've had for years, like the yarrow bed that y'all worked on this year, where it's like, yeah, we've had that bed for years, but like now it's gotten tired and now it needs to be like maintenanced. So I think some of the difficulties of farming is also like what you don't know, and over time, like you don't realize that you're gonna have to like replace something when you're gonna have to replace it, and then the time comes, right? Similar to like owning a car, right? Whereas like, okay, like there's these checkups you need to do, but like sometimes things also just break that you weren't expecting. That seems to happen a lot on farms, where it's just like things break, or people get sick, or like the weather changes dramatically. So like having to be flexible makes it hard to plan ahead, honestly. Like now that I have more staff, like Carice is working with us and Ashley's working with us, and we had Carla this summer, I was like planning their schedules more than I have in the past. And you can only plan so many days in advance because, yeah, there's things that you know are coming up, but like you kind of have to wait until it's the right moment. It's like I can say like, okay, do this on this day, but then it's raining all that day, so you have to totally change your schedule. Being really connected to land, like seeing and interacting with the land every single day, has definitely made me more interested in what that relationship means to me over time, and like what I gain from just being around plants. Like I'd say as time goes on, like I actually use less and less herbs, and gain more and more from just being with the herbs. And as I've been kind of like looking into my own ancestry and kind of my own like, you know, genetic background, and looking at like what people in my family might have done and connected with land through, that's given me some inspiration for like wanting to connect with land, and like, I don't know, really just valuing that like this life comes from this, you know, like having access to this is really, it's rare and it's special. And it makes me kind of sad that it's rare and it's special. And at the same time, I'm so thankful for modern life, you know, so it's, I don't know, it gives me more questions than it gives me answers usually. But I do feel like I've started to build a real reverence for the land and for having a relationship with the land in a way that feels spiritual outside of organized religion. I think it might be fennel.
Yeah?
Honestly, it might be fennel. Like, it is definitely like the herb that I like reach for the most. And it's the one that has like always felt safe to me. Like some of my history of illness has dealt with like dysautonomia, and so like when that's present, it can feel really disorienting. Like when things come into your body and like create these huge fluctuations that you weren't expecting, it can make it really difficult to feel safe with things, or like food starts to feel unsafe because you're getting all these reactions all the time. And fennel has always felt really consistent for me. Like it's always been a plant that feels really safe and really like gentle. I think milky oats also feels that way for me, like feels really like gentle and safe. Tulsi. Yeah, those are plants that I feel like I can reach for anytime.
Awesome.
Yeah. The other plants feel really like helpful. Like California poppy has been like such an ally for me, for helping with like kind of like restless leg and restless energy and like pain with sleeping. But it's a plant that is like pretty specific, right? Like I reach for it at a very specific time. Whereas I feel like fennel is kind of my friend always.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.